Good morning and welcome to the 2023 Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Awareness Day Policy Webinar. My name is Sandra Friedman. I'm the Director of JFK Partners. There are a few housekeeping items to cover before we get started with the presentation. Because our presenters are on site at the Colorado Capitol, this webinar has been pre-recorded. You may contact our presenters directly with any questions about the content of this webinar. Their contact information will be included on the last slide of this presentation. A recording of this webinar and the slides also will be posted online soon on the Awareness Day web page, which you could see on this slide, this link, how to access it. And finally, please join us at noon to watch the Awareness Day virtual luncheon live. You can also find the link on the Awareness Day webpage. IDD Awareness Day is jointly hosted by JFK Partners, Alliance, and the ARC of Colorado. JFK Partners is Colorado's University Center of Excellence on Developmental Disabilities and Leadership Education and Neurodevelopmental Disability Programs. Our mission is to promote the individuality, inclusion, active community engagement, and health and well-being of all people of diverse backgrounds with developmental disabilities and their families. Alliance is a nonprofit statewide association of community center boards, program-approved service agency, strategic partners, and Alliance network members dedicated to strengthening services and support for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. The ARC of Colorado provides system advocacy, public awareness, community education, and support for self-advocacy organizations across the state for persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families. The ARC of Colorado is a state chapter, and across the state, we have an additional 14 local chapters. So I've already introduced myself. Ellen Jensby will be one of our speakers. She's Senior Director of Public Policy and Operations. Elizabeth Moran is the Executive Director of the ARC of Colorado, who also will be presenting in just a bit. And now let me turn the presentation over to Ellen Jensby, who will talk about our agenda and set the stage for the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandy. So we're going to cover a few topics today. First, we'll start off with some background about Developmental Disabilities Awareness Month, which occurs every March, and some activities that have already taken place in honor of that annual event. Then I'll cover some background information on the direct support professional workforce crisis and Colorado budget actions currently moving through the legislature that are designed to address that problem. Elizabeth will then cover a number of bills that are moving through the Colorado legislature this year related to people with IDD and their services. And then we will jointly cover how you can get involved in legislative advocacy at any level. Elizabeth, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ellen, and thank you, Sandy, for that kind introduction. So I want to start here. March, back in 1987, the then President Ronald Reagan officially declared March as National Developmental Disabilities Awareness Month. So it seems particularly appropriate that so many of you, our advocates, network partners, legislative and public policy champions, are joining us here this last week of March to do just that, to raise awareness. And we're so grateful for your support and also just your advocacy in celebrating, promoting, and protecting the human rights of people with disabilities. And actively supporting their inclusion and participation in the communities across the lifetime. You know, in the words of our Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she said that real change, enduring change, happens one step at a time. And I believe that's what we're doing here today, and what we did earlier in the month. So the kickoff event for DD Awareness Month was on March 1st. We did Disability Rights Advocacy Day. I know many of you were here for that event as well. to meet with legislators, to attend the press conference, to participate in the rally, to really make sure that your voice is heard and that your stories are shared with legislators in meaningful ways so that they better understand how legislation impacts your lives. Next slide, please. So this morning, the Colorado House and Senate honored the IDD community with tributes. And so we'd like to thank our tribute sponsors, Representatives Mary Young, Ryan Armagoss, and Senators Rod Pelton and Rachel Zenzinger. Additionally, you see on the right-hand side of our slide here, Governor Polis issued a proclamation for IDD awareness. And we're so grateful that our state policymakers are supportive of people with IDD and the entire community and are helping us to raise that awareness. If you've not had an opportunity to read the tribute or the proclamation, I would encourage you to go to Alliance's IDD Awareness Day website where you can view those documents and read some of those proclamations. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Ellen.
Thank you, Elizabeth. On to the direct support workforce crisis. So a little bit of background here. Direct support professionals, or as we often refer to them, DSPs, are workers who assist people with disabilities to lead fulfilling lives in the community of their choice through a diverse range of services and activities. They may help them get ready for work in the morning, take their medication. They may help them with finding a job, transportation to and from that job, participating in social activities and volunteer activities. There's a large variety of community-based services that are available that direct support professionals provide. And unfortunately, as many of you may be aware, the pandemic worsened some long-standing challenges to recruit and retain enough direct support professionals to adequately serve people with IDD with consistency and high quality. And so now we're in a place this year where we have a severe shortage of direct support professionals. It's a shortage that's been continuing for the last couple of years. And unfortunately, the results of that have pretty sweeping impacts. We are seeing provider agencies reducing their programs and actually having waiting lists for some of their programs. So they may only be able to serve, for instance, half or 75% of people in day services that they used to. We also see providers turning away new referrals, people who would like to receive services from them, but they simply don't have enough staff to provide them. They may delay the launch of new services and service models, and unfortunately, they are facing unsustainable turnover costs as people leave the workforce and they have to then recruit new staff. And of course, most importantly, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities can't access all of the services that they might need. And this is something that we refer to as the invisible wait list. So while someone might technically be enrolled into services, they aren't able to find the providers or the staff to provide the full array and full amount of services that they want. And of course, this also results in a lot of staff turnover. And when a direct support professional is helping you with some of the most intimate daily activities of your life, that can really have a profound impact on you. So these are some of our concerns. And this year, thankfully, our state policymakers have proposed some solutions that the Colorado legislature is now analyzing and working through. This week is actually a big week in our state's budget process. So they are reviewing all of these recommendations, and many of these recommendations originated in the governor's annual budget proposal that was released in November of 2022. And here are a few of them. So the first recommendation was to increase rates for certain services that are provided by direct support professionals in order to raise their base pay to at least $15.75 per hour all across the state. And that's consistent with the increase in the statewide minimum wage this year. That base wage was $15 per hour last year. So that's a 75-cent per hour increase. And then in Denver, because Denver has a local minimum wage law, the base wage for direct support professionals will be $17.29 per hour. But importantly, in order to be able to pay these base wages, the rates need to be increased to accommodate those increased costs. Next, the governor's budget proposed some targeted rate increases for group residential services as well as non-medical transportation. Group residential services have particularly struggled during the pandemic. There was a point at which, unfortunately, we had to have National Guard troops come in and volunteer in some of those residential settings just to fill the service or the staffing gaps that we had. We're no longer seeing those dire circumstances, but we have seen a lot of group homes close in the past couple of years because of the inadequacy of staffing. And so these targeted increases will hopefully help to recruit and retain enough staff to help keep those residences open. With respect to non-medical transportation, the goal there is to align the reimbursement rates for this service for people with IDD with the same service on other waivers for other populations. So it's really an equity proposal there. Additionally, every year, the legislature approves a percentage increase for all Medicaid services. And right now, the proposal on the table is a 3% increase. And so we are hoping that the legislature chooses to keep that because I'm sure everyone is aware of all the significant inflation and additional costs that we're seeing out there in the world today. Additionally, Alliance specifically has asked for some additional targeted increases for behavioral services. People who are still really struggling with the impacts of the pandemic, the isolation and the anxiety are requesting those services more than ever. And we're seeing some significant closures among behavioral services agencies, as well as providers of massage, music, and movement therapies, because they're just unable to retain the staff that they compete for with other large providers like hospitals. Next to last, the legislature is looking at a new rate structure for case management. Our state is currently in the process of a complete redesign of our case management system for people with disabilities and all other Medicaid waiver populations. And so we need to have sustainable rates for these new entities that will come in and take over that work. Finally, in the realm of early intervention, which are services for children from birth to 3 years old who have developmental disabilities or delays, our state is looking at approving expanded eligibility for children to access those services, as well as some workforce investments to make sure there are enough providers to provide them. We are so grateful that our governor's office, as well as our joint budget committee, who takes the lead in setting the state's annual budget every year, have shown great support for the IDD community, and we hope that the General Assembly will agree that these are important investments to be made. All right, with that, I believe I'm turning it back over to Elizabeth to cover bills.
Great, thank you, Ellen. So, you might be asking with IDD Awareness Day and the national holiday being the month, and what can you do to raise awareness, and what can you do to advocate for the civil and human rights of individuals with developmental disabilities? One way you can get involved is to watch some of the bills that are coming down through the legislative process and select those that impact you or the people you care about and support, and talk to your legislator about why you support that bill, or why you believe there needs to be an amendment, or why it should be opposed. And a little bit later on, Ellen and I will talk about ways you can do that. But I want to start with just some bills that we've identified during this year's legislative process, and talk a little bit, just bring them to your attention so that you can take a look at them. And if you would like to support them or ask for an amendment, or even if you're going to oppose them, but take an opportunity to speak with your legislators about them. Next slide. So this is just a list of bills that we are largely in support of, and certainly encourage you to take a look at. I'm going to go through each one individually. I won't go into great detail, but I do just want to give you sort of a high-level overview of what each bill is. Next slide. So this first one is House Bill 23-1168. And I like to think of this one as my 1168 because legal representation cannot wait. So currently, the law entitles parents, guardians to file a state complaint against their child's education provider. What House Bill 1168 does, it creates a pool of pro bono attorneys. Pro bono means at no charge. They don't charge. They are free to represent parents who are being sued by school districts in a due process hearing in certain situations. The sort of policy behind that is, you can imagine that if parents are in a due process hearing and they're up against sort of an educated or a legal team, and they are not represented, that tips the scale not in their favor. And so the idea is to create some equality there with legal representation. And so the way it would work under this bill is that parents could contact this designated nonprofit organization. They would keep a list of attorneys, and then they would work to bridge that gap to make sure that there is one appointed to their specific case. So again, this is House Bill 1168, because legal representation cannot wait. Next slide. So Senate Bill 23064, and my slogan for that is OPG, we need more. OPG being the continuation of the Office of Public Guardianship. So this bill was created actually back in 2017 to provide guardianship services in 3 judicial districts, primarily in the Denver metro area, through June 2024. So what this bill does, it extends the continuation of the OPG indefinitely. And it makes it so that these services, the same kind of guardianship services, would be provided throughout the state of Colorado by December of 2027. It adds a board of directors. The statute clearly states that it must include a person with lived experience. And then it also has some explicit requirements for training of guardians who work under the Office of Public Guardianship to ensure that they have information and training on less restrictive alternatives to guardian, like supported decision-making, limited guardianships, those sorts of alternatives that are less restrictive and don't impact that individual's human rights quite so severely. Next slide. House Bill 23-1197. This bill has to do with stakeholder process for the oversight of host home providers. And my slogan for this one is oversight, it's what's right. So what this bill does is it requires the Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing to engage in a stakeholder process that would address concerns and solutions for people who are living in host homes. The statute requires that process would start by September of 2023, so it's a pretty quick turnaround. And it would include provider agencies, case management agencies, the host home providers themselves, and then also the people who are impacted, the people with lived experience and their advocates and or advocacy groups. The bill also requires that results of that process be reported to the legislature. Our primary sponsor for this bill is Mary Young. And I meant to tell you on the earlier slides that the legislators who are sponsoring these bills are listed on the side. So if you're wondering who to contact to get information or to share your story or why you would be in support or suggested amendments, those are the folks that you would want to contact. Next slide. So school policies and student conduct. This is Senate Bill 23-1109. So under current law, the current law allows suspensions, expulsions, denied admissions for behavior that happens on or off school property. What Senate Bill 1109 does, it requires school districts to add procedural safeguards for expulsion hearings. So if an off-school behavior is unrelated to a school-sponsored event, there wouldn't be an automatic suspension or expulsion or denial. There would be a review process in place to determine whether or not that would be appropriate. It also adds training for hearing officers on disabilities and on trauma-informed care, and also different intervention techniques to de-escalate situations. The legislation also expands data reporting on hearing results and reactions of the school officials. So in other words, like how the incident was handled, how it was processed, just putting some more protections in place. Next slide. House Bill 23-1042 is the admissibility standards for juvenile statements. So what this bill does is it narrows the admissibility of juvenile statements to protect the voluntariness of such statements. So as you might imagine, particularly for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, what we're trying to protect is our statements that are potentially made under undue influence, where there might have been some pressure, or maybe they didn't understand what was being asked of them, or and so forth and so on. So what this piece of legislation does is it makes it so that if law enforcement knowingly uses deception during an interrogation, the statement is presumptively inadmissible against that student at the hearing. So, and you'll see there's a little sideline there that says, unless the prosecution proves that the admission was voluntary. So it changes sort of the standard of proof, so that it has to be, the prosecution has to prove that statement was voluntary, rather than just assuming that it was given in that context. The legislation also provides that peace officer standards and training, the training board must develop training for peace officers on juvenile interrogation, and it must include awareness of communication accommodations required by the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I want to talk about that for just a second. Most of us know about, under Title II of the ADA, there's this thing called effective communication, right? So everyone who has a disability that impacts their ability to communicate, including intellectual and developmental disabilities, across the lifespan, anything that has to do with diminished capacity, has a right to supports and accommodations that ensure effective communication, such that those individuals are able to participate in meaningful ways in due process. And I think often we sort of pick the low-hanging fruit, and we think, oh, an interpreter, Braille, large print, assistive technology. And we really need to be thinking, really stretching ourselves to think about what kind of effective communication accommodations and supports actually meet the intention of Title II of the ADA to ensure that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are able to engage in meaningful ways, both to communicate, but also to receive that information, so that they can then make informed choice. Next slide. So this is the last bill that I wanted to just bring to everyone's attention. This is House Bill 23-1249, and it's the reduced justice involvement for young children. And the basis of this piece of legislation is to end prosecution and detention of kids aged 10 to 12 by July of 2024. It expands entities that can refer a child or a family of victim to the collaborative management programs for services. CMPs coordinate local services for kids who need them. CMPs can refer victims directly to services and resources, which we hope would improve coordination. This piece of legislation also allows law enforcement to take control of situations that might help to maintain the safety of the child and others who are impacted. So those are sort of the highlighted bills that we wanted to bring to your attention. And I'm going to pass it back to you, Ellen, because I know there are a few more additional bills that you're hoping folks will keep their eye on.
Sure. Thanks, Elizabeth. That was a great summary of those priority bills. So every legislative session in Colorado, hundreds of bills are introduced. Many of them relate either directly or sort of tangentially to people with disabilities. So we're not going to cover the details of each one of these bills, but they were close enough related that we wanted to give you the bill number and the short title, as well as the link. And if you noticed in each of the slides that Elizabeth covered, the title is also a hyperlink. So when you go to access the copy of slides, you can click on any of these links and it'll take you to the bill page on the Colorado General Assembly website, where you can find the bill text, the latest on what's happened in its passage, any amendments that go along with it, the sponsors and ways to find their contact information if you'd like to contact them. So these are just a few additional disability related bills. But there are even more. And if you would like to see the full list of bills that Alliance and the ARC of Colorado are tracking this year or taking positions on, here are the links to our organization's bill trackers. And we invite you to take a look at those if you are interested in the legislative side of things. All right, now we are going to move on to Legislative Advocacy 101. And this is our sort of shortened version of how you can be involved in the legislative process, regardless of sort of your level and your time constraints and your ability to get involved. So Elizabeth and I are going to tag team this one, and I will turn it over to you for the first slide.
Great, thanks. So this slide is called beginner advocacy, but really what it is are what are the things you can do that don't take a lot of time, a lot of investment, or a lot of knowledge about legislative process? How can you get involved? So step one is to find out who your representatives are. So the link that's provided on this slide, leg.colorado.gov/find-your-legislator, you can click on that link and you can type in your address. And it will auto-populate who your representatives are, and it will also give you their contact information so that if you would want to reach out to them or just identify who they are, it's a super easy process to do. And then you can also go to congress.gov/members and find out sort of what committees are they sitting on, what bills are they sponsoring, those sorts of things to learn more about who your local representative is. I would connect with organizations you trust. Follow them on social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, probably some more social media sites than I even am aware of. But reach out and do a little Google search. Just type in organizations like Alliance and the ARC and JFK and some of our network partners and find out who they are. Follow them on social media. That way they'll auto-populate in your feed. Sign up for newsletters, respond to action alerts that you get just to get involved. If you haven't already, register to vote. One of the most important things you can do to make your voice heard is to vote. Participate in any election process, big or small, to make sure your voice is heard and to make sure that the folks who are passing legislation, developing policy, that those are folks who support you and your life and advocate for your rights. Program your elected officials' contact info on your phone. So when you do that Find My Legislator piece and you get their phone number, go ahead and put it in your phone. That way, when something comes up, you can instantly contact them and let them know that you support, oppose, wish for an amendment, or you just want to get involved in some way.
Great. And one thing I think we always forget too is that we should thank our legislators when they support something that we agree with. And they truly do appreciate seeing those tweets and posts that thank them for the great work that they're doing too.
Absolutely.
All right, I will cover intermediate advocacy. So this is designed to be steps that take, 15 minutes to an hour. So using bill trackers or scorecards from those organizations that you just followed on the last slide, you can learn how your legislator voted on important bills and issues that you care about. And so then you can use that information to tweet your thanks or tell them you'd like to see something different next time. You can, of course, call or visit your legislator in person or even on Zoom these days to discuss issues that you care about and share your lived experience as a person with a disability, a family member, a friend, whatever your role in the community is. Those stories are what hit the closest to home with our legislators, and they remember those when they're working on bills. In fact, if you have, that relationship with them, they may just call you and say, "What's your opinion on SB, whatever the number is?" and get your take on it. And then, of course, the media is important too. So you can write a letter to the editor of your local newspaper to educate the public more broadly, of course, but legislators also take note if an issue that they're working on or their name is mentioned in the newspaper or any type of media outlet. So remember to do that as well. And that's an important way to share your story. Next, Elizabeth.
Great. So I'm going to talk about some advanced advocacy, things that take a little bit longer, but aren't terribly difficult and still provide an opportunity for you to really engage in the process. The first one is attend or testify at a hearing. So you can attend hearings, all hearings, unless they go into a closed session, which they will post. But all of them are open to the public, right? We often hear about it's the people's house, and they're just meeting in the people's rooms, right? To have meetings. So come down, sit in, hear what the conversations are. And if you feel so inspired, testify, tell your story that, Ellen was talking about the impact of your personal story. It really does make a difference for them when they're making decisions and they have that story in the back of their head. So you'll see that there is a Colorado session schedule link on the page, and also a public testimony options, lots of options for in-person, for written testimony. In some cases, they can live stream you in, video you in, but I would encourage you to do that. I've had folks say to me, yeah, but how do, even if I attend, if I see someone in the hall, how do I know how to talk to my legislator? And I always say, just have prepared what you'd like them to do, then tell them why, and then make your ask, and then reiterate sort of the why you want them to do it. And if you can keep it, sometimes we call it the elevator speech, right? Keeping it short and simple, but sort of have that in your head before you go, planned out. This is my ask. This is why it needs to be legislative action, not necessarily a policy or a practice, but really we need a law about it. And be prepared to have that conversation. The second bullet there says attend or host a candidate forum, town hall, or other educational opportunity, and ask about their stance on issues that are important to you. I've been to a handful. I've only been in Colorado, back in Colorado, I should say. This is my second time living in Colorado for a few months. And I've already attended a couple of town halls. And this is what I would say. Go to those town halls. They're typically not super, crowded. And so they provide opportunities for you to have that one-on-one time with your legislator and share your story, share your stance, ask them questions about where they stand on things that are important to you. But also consider hosting them for a lunch, host them for a meeting, perhaps that you're already having with an organization, or a work meeting where you want to bring someone in. Give them, 10, 15 minutes of time to introduce themselves and take questions from your folks, your stakeholders. Invite them to come to things that you already have in place. It doesn't have to be something super formal or, on a agenda, but really just engaging with them in whatever way you can. And then finally, volunteer, create lasting relationships, be an ongoing resource. Let them know. Sometimes legislators don't know what resources are out there or who to tap into when they have a question about certain things, particularly around intellectual and developmental disabilities. Let them know that you're available. Let them know you want to be a resource. And really just continue to engage with them on whatever level you're comfortable with, wherever you're comfortable with it. That's it for me, Ellen.
Great. Well, that concludes our presentation for today. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to either of us. We're happy to try to answer those questions for you or get you to the right place. Again, as a reminder, the slides and the recording of this presentation will be posted on the Awareness Day website. And please join us back promptly at noon for the airing of our live Awareness Day virtual luncheon, where we'll have several keynote speakers, including our 2022 Legislator of the Year, Mary Young, as well as a presentation of this year's Direct Support Professional of the Year award. Thank you and have a great day.
Thanks all.